finished yesterday's discussion, and yesterday's discussion was actually quite fascinating because Abaye collected a number of different Tanaim, a number of different positions in various Mishnayot that all, from Abaye's perspective, made greater requirements of a sukkah that reflects an understanding of a sukkah as diras keva, as a more permanent structure. And as we said, this is part of the whole question of a sukkah, because the sukkah, on the one hand, is the difference between your house. Your house is permanent, your sukkah is temporary. On the other hand, your sukkah is a substitute for your house, so it has to maybe be more house-like. So Abaye identified a number of positions where each one might have his own unique reason, but they could all be seen as rooted in the idea of sukkah as a permanent structure, but maybe how that idea of greater permanence translates is interpreted differently by the different Tanaim. So let's actually pick up from that very quickly, again from the beginning, it'll get us more in the middle of Zayin Amud Bet, but we'll do it quickly. We had done half of it yesterday. So it's about 20 lines down. The line starts with the word Mechsi Kischach. So Amar Ba, yes?
So is it the stock that makes it the concept of temporary dwelling in terms of the idea?
Oh, yes. Well, that is true. Meaning, even those that say that it's more permanent, and thank you for pointing that out. Tosa said you could have permanent walls, but you can't have a permanent roof. So it's a good point. According to those that say that it is more permanent, what distinguishes it from your house? Now, we're going to see something at the end of today's daf, God willing, we'll get there, that it might just be your usage. Maybe structurally it could be identical, and maybe the only difference is whether you use it during the year or not. But what you're saying is probably correct, that no matter who says it's a permanent structure, the schach remains temporary and remains what fundamentally distinguishes it. Presumably nobody disagrees with that, and that was a tosos we did at the very beginning. Yes, so thank you for pointing that out. Amar Bai, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Beis Shammai, Rabbi Eliezer, Yachirim, all those Tanaim, Kulus Fielu Sukkah Deres Keva Beginan. They all say sukkah in some way is a permanent structure, or to some degree permanent, and that's reflected in certain requirements. But each one sort of translates that into different requirements. Rebbe Detanya, Rebbe Omer, Kol Sukkah Shein Bo Arbal Mos, Psula. It has to be 4x4 amot, not Rosho Veruba, not V'Shulchano, not 7 Tfachim. It has to be a more serious size. Rabbi Yoshia had Amrin. Rabbi Yoshia, who says the walls have to provide shade. What's a house that has transparent walls? No, to be a serious, have more permanence and be a more serious house, like the walls have to provide shade as well. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda allows the sukkah higher than 20 amot. So that's got to be more permanent, and he allows it. He doesn't require it. That's why this is a little bit different, as opposed to the others who require it. Here it's just Rabbi Yehuda allows it. Rabbi Shimon, Titania, two and a bit, 2 walls and a little bit is the requirement. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Gimel Kil Chasan, V'arba Filu Tefach, 3 walls and a little bit. So that's a requirement that makes it more of a serious, permanent structure, more house-like. Okay, and it's similar. It should be mentioned to the Rabbi Yoshia, who demands the walls provide shade. You're demanding not just schach, and the walls are very secondary. You want the walls to serve a more house-like function. Either they have to surround you more, 3 and a bit, or they have to shade, and those are ways in which it's more house-like. Rabbi Gamliel de Tanya. And now, so those are Tanaim we've already seen, and now new Tanaim. Rabbi Gamliel, because we taught, Breita, so it's not just a Mishnah now that we're looking at. Ha'osa, actually, Rabbi Yosha also wasn't, a lot of these weren't Mishnayot, they were Breitas. Ha'osa sukkah barosha gala, o barosha srina. If you make a sukkah at the top of a wagon, on a wagon, like a Chabad sort of, sort of portable sukkah, so with a sukkah mobile, or on the top of a boat, Rabbi Gamliel posts out Rabbi Akiva Machir. Rabbi Gamliel says it's no good. Rabbi Akiva says it's good. Why should it not be good? And the reason it's not good is because it's less stable. Now, Tosfos has a question whether the wagon example should be here. The boat in the Gemara in particular is an issue because the winds on the ocean are much stronger than on the dry land. So it won't be able to stand up to the winds on the ocean, even though it could stand up if it remains in the port. And the wagon also might be part of the debate, depending on if you have that girsa here, because also, it bounces around and it's less stable and it could fall apart. So something that is stability is more precarious. That is debated. Rabbi Gamliel says no good. It has to be more stable. Beit Shammai, how about Beit Shammai? Mishaya Rosh Ruba Sukkah B'Shulchan B'Toch Habayis. Beit Shammai Posum Beit Hillel Machshirim. The debate of Beit Hillel Beit Shammai, whether a sukkah has to contain just your head and your body, or your head and your body and your table. Now that does not seem like a big difference, right? That seems like okay, it's diras arai, but it still has to be a dira. If your table's in the house or it's not big enough for your table, you're not even going to be temporarily there. You're always going to be running after your table. So again, they're not all to the same degree, but everybody here makes greater demands of some sense of stability and permanence and so on. Although conceptually, you would have put Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai in roughly the same category and just disagreeing on degree. Nevertheless, at least Rabbi here is saying Beit Shammai is more in this direction of permanence. Okay, of course, we paskin like Beit Shammai, but that doesn't necessarily mean we paskin sukkah as a permanent dwelling, because again, Beit Shammai is the least of these Tanaim that make these demands. Okay. Rabbi Eliezer, how about Rabbi Eliezer? Because we taught ha'osa sukaso can mean tzrif. If you make your sukkah like a teepee, or Rashi actually says it might not just be a teepee, it might also be, something sort of like a yurt. I think, if I remember what a yurt is, but it's basically maybe more like an igloo. I think igloo is the better example, where the roof is a continuation of the walls, and there's not a clear line. Here are the walls. Here's the roof. Okay, so you make it a teepee, an igloo, or a lean-to. A lean-to is samcha lakotel. So all of those, you could maybe halachically imagine that part of the wall is a roof, but it doesn't structurally really have that clear line of what's the walls, what's the roof. Rabbi Eliezer posel if shein lagag. If there's no structural roof, even there's a halachic roof, and it's not good. The Chachamim say it's okay. So again, the demand for something to be more house-like, with a real distinguishable roof and walls, Abai is putting it in the similar category. Again, whether all of this is about keva, permanence, not all of these is about the concept of permanence. Some of these might be, like I'm saying, more of a concept of house-like. But nevertheless, Abai is putting all these together. All these Tanaim have demands of a sukkah that it be more house-like and more in that direction. 3 walls, 3.5 walls. The walls provide shade. It has to be bigger, 4x4. Has to have a distinguishable roof. All of these things are roughly in this position that a sukkah has to be more keva, more house-like. Acherim, how about others, which is usually Rabbi Meir. Titania, we taught in the Brisa. Acherim omrim sukkah asuya keshuvach psula. If you have a circular sukkah, it is invalid, even if it's got a normal roof. But if it's a circle, it's invalid because it doesn't have corners. Who lives in a circular house? Okay, yeah, that's the yurt, I guess. Okay, but anyway, normal people live in houses with angles and walls and a distinguishable roof and so on. So that is not a normal type of a place that people live, and therefore no good. So each one of these maybe has a different articulation of how this translates halachically, but they want a sukkah to be more house-like. Now, it should be known that there's a general principle in halacha that when a Gemara says, this is not uncommon, that a Gemara says, all of these Tanaim all hold this shita. Okay, that it's just fascinating, right? Collecting them together and trying to see them as coming from a similar approach. There's an importance, obviously, in that, beyond the question of halacha. But there tends to be a halachic assumption that when the Gemara does that, it's coming to say, we don't paskin like it. It's coming to almost bracket them out and say, yeah, they're all coming from this approach. That's not the approach we go by. Now, the Gemara doesn't say that here, but it just is interesting to know that there's an idea that when the Gemara sort of does, shita achat, that it's to be pushed away from halacha. Again, not clear from what we read, but that tends to be a halachic assumption. Okay, now that we've mentioned a circular sukkah, we're going to move into some real fun discussion about geometry. So everybody who loved geometry in high school, okay, this is the Gemaras that they really love. Everybody who hated it, okay, let's stick with me. All right, I'm not going to say I'm going to be better than your geometry teacher, but let's take a look. So the Gemara says like this, Am Reb Yochanan, Sukkah haisuya kikivshan, if a sukkah is made like a furnace, meaning it's a circular sukkah, if in its circumference there is enough for 24 people to sit, kshera, it's kosher, v'imah psula, if not, it's invalid. Now, we have to make some assumptions. First of all, the minimum size of a sukkah, the way we paskin, is 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim. You do not need, there's no way you're going to need 24 people to sit in a circular sukkah to fit 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim. Right? 7 tvachim is about what? 2 feet by 2 feet. Okay? 24 people is going to be a lot more than a 2 foot by 2 foot square. So the first assertion the Gemara makes is, Kiman Kerebi, we first have to be starting with an assumption that your minimum sukkah is a larger one. So the biggest size we have for a minimum sukkah is Rebbe, 4 amot by 4 amot. Okay, so that's 60. So for us, that's like 6 feet by 6 feet. Okay, now 24 people sitting in 6 feet by 6 feet, right? It would seem that that's maybe a lot. You can right. So if you imagine roughly a person, is in like a foot and a half, depending if you're trying to sit on a New York subway, seat or whatever. The Gemara imagines a normal person sits in an amma. So I'm going to drop feet. We'll stick with amas, but I just wanted to give you the imagination. An amma is about 1.5 feet. How big do they make the seats in the New York subway? Maybe 1.5 feet.
4 by 4 is 16.
What? Right. So exactly. So if you imagine that a person sits in an amma by an amma, okay, then that's 16. Where are you getting 24? What?
It's not big enough. I mean, close.
Yeah, I know. It's big enough on the New York subway, right? So but anyway, that's the Gemara's assumption about an amma by an amma. Well, I mean, if you sit tight, right? That's like New York City subway. Okay, anyway. So let's see why you need 24. So the Gemara says, Michti, let's figure this out, says the Gemara. Let's see. Gavra ba'amsa yossi. If a person sits in an amma, meaning like an amma by an amma, as we'll see, that'll be important later. Anything that the circumference is 3, yesh ba rochav tefach. The width, meaning the diameter, is 1. Meaning, what is the proportion of circumference to diameter? Pi, right? Everybody remember this? Right? Pi equals 2r. Wait, no. I'm sorry. Circumference equals 2 pi r. No, that's area. This is circumference, okay? 2r is diameter. So circumference equals pi times diameter, right? Pi times diameter, which is another way of saying pi is the ratio of the circumference to the diameter. Yes? Okay, so here's your circle, your circumference, that's your diameter. The ratio of circumference to diameter is what pi is. Okay, so the Gemara estimates pi at 3. All right, we're not going to do that. There's another Gemara that learns it out from the sort of big bath that they had in the time of Shlomo, not bath, whatever, anyway, the big immersion pool in the Beis HaMikdash. But we're not going to worry about that. The Gemara estimates it as 3. Okay, so the Gemara is saying anything that has a diameter 1 has a circumference of 3. 3 is our estimate of pi. All right, so that's what the Gemara starts by saying. Or says the other way. Anything that has a circumference of 3, yesh bo rochav tefach, has a diameter of 1. So betracer sadi. So the Gemara starts by saying if your sukkah needs to be 4 amot, so 4 is the height, right? If it needs to be 4 amot, then the circumference of it should only have to be a 12 circumference. You have 4 amot, 4 times 3 is a 12 circumference. Why do you need 24? The answer to that is obvious, because you don't fit a 4 by 4 square into that. At the widest point is 4. But that's the Gemara's first question. Okay? What if you need 4 amot? So you have a diameter of 4 amot, and now your circumference will be 12. A tracer sagi, 12 should be enough. The Gemara says, no. Hanimili bi igula. It's true. If you're dealing with a circle, so if you had a 4 diameter, you would only need a 12 circumference circle, right? That's what you would have. But when we say a sukkah has to be 4, we don't mean at its widest point. We mean 4 by 4. Although biribua by itfei, but we need a square of 4 by 4. Okay, so how big does the circle have to be to fit inside of it a square of 4 by 4? Is that clear what we're trying to get at? Yes, your circle has to be 4 by 4. A circle has to fit a square inside of it, a 4 by 4. So the Gemara says, Michti. Let's take a look. Kama meruba yoser al ha'igol revia. How much bigger is a circle, is a square than a circle? It is a quarter. What does this mean? It means that the Gemara is first going to be looking at a circle in a square. Really should be looking at a square in a circle. We'll get to that in a minute. But it's first going to look at a circle in a square. Squaring off the circle. Now, so, whatever. You got the idea. What is the ratio of the circumference of the circle to the circumference of the square. Well, if this is 1, right, or let's call this circumference, okay, right, that's the circumference. So the circle's, not circumference, diameter, thank you, diameter. The circle's circumference is 3d, right, 3 times diameter, because we're estimating pi at 3. What's the circumference of the square?
D squared.
No, circumference of the square. 4d, right? Each side, it's d, right? 4d. So the square is a quarter bigger, a quarter of this, or the circle is a quarter less of the circumference of the square. Okay, so that's the line in the Gemara which says, let's read that again. Michti. Kama ribua yoser al ha'igel. How much bigger is the circumference of the square to the circle? Revia. It is a quarter bigger, meaning if it's 4, the circle inside of it is 3. B'shitza sardi. So the Gemara says, now obviously, this is, it's funny that it makes an assumption, but it says like this. It says, okay, so if you had what's the circumference that you need of a square 4 by 4? What's the circumference of a square that's 4 by 4? 16. Okay, and the 16 circumference, right? That's the circumference of, or circumference equals 16. So the Gemara says, we've just proven that a circle that has a width of 4 has a circumference of 12. So the square that has a width of 4 has a circumference of 16. Okay, could have done it easier. Could have just said a square 4 by 4 has a circumference of 16. But since we've been starting with the circle, and we said if this is 4, the circumference is 12, it says, oh, well, the square is a quarter bigger, so the square is 16. So why, says the Gemara, let's have the circle that we demand just have the same circumference of the square. Okay, that's a little complicated, but basically the way it's saying is, we need a square 4 by 4, right? The circumference of a square 4 by 4 is 16. Okay, that's the point it said. It said 12, from 12 we get 16, the circumference is 16. Anyway, it's obvious. Circumference of a square 4 by 4 is 16. Okay, so then the Gemara says, fine. So if you're making a circle sukkah, just have it have a circumference of 16. Why do you need a circumference of 24? Take the circumference and make the circle have the same circumference. Okay, and the Gemara's answer is no, that's not what you need to do. Okay, Hani mili be equal to nafik migo rivua. If the circle's in the square, so then the square around it would have a circumference of 16 in this example, if the circle had a circumference of 12. But we don't just want to say what, imagine that the circumference of the square around it. We need to get the circle to contain a square. And that again is here. This is so. That's the idea that the outer square is a 3 to 4 ratio. Okay, we'll just leave that here to remember that point. Okay, so the first point we made is that the ratio of the sort of circumference here, right? The circumference of the circle, whatever. That's not confusing. Anyway, the circumference here is 3, then the circumference of the square is 4. That's a 3 to 4 ratio, okay, of the circumference. But the Gemara says we're not interested in a square around a circle. We're interested in your sukkah here is a circle. And you need to fit a square sukkah in your sukkah, in your current sukkah. So you have a circle, and we have to say it has to be big enough to fit a square that is 4 by 4 into the sukkah. Okay? Now, can you figure out, any good people who are good at geometry, how we're going to figure out what type of square you need to fit what type of circle you need to fit a 4 by 4?
To draw a line.
You have to figure out what is the diameter. Okay? What's the diameter of the circle? What is the diameter?
Diagonal.
I'm saying, it's the diagonal of the square. It's the diameter of the circle. What's the diagonal of the square?
It's square root of both sides.
Yeah, it's 4 times, right? Everybody remember your Pythagorean theorem? 4 times the square root of 2, right? A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So the diagonal of if you have A and B are the same, the diagonal is times the square root of 2. That is the circumference of the circle, okay? And therefore, that's the diameter of the circle, and therefore the circumference is going to have to be 3, right? It's 3 times the diameter. 3 times 4 times the square root of 2. What? Square root of 30? I don't know. It's 12 times the square root of 2. It's going to be 3 times 4 times the square root of 2. Okay, so let's take a look. That's what the Gemara is going to do, okay? So the Gemara says like this. Okay, michti. Let's take a look. Kol amsa beribua amsa v'trei chumshe balachsona. Kol amsa beribua, anything that's an amma squared, an amma by an amma, a square that's an amma by an amma. Amsa v'trei chumshe balachsona is 1 2/5, 1.4 in the diagonal. So anything that is 1 by 1 has a diagonal of 1.4, which means 1.4 is the Gemara's estimate of,
The diameter.
of the square root of 2. Okay? It's saying that the basic ratio here of a 1 by 1, the diagonal is, do people remember why this is true? Yes, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So if a and b are the same, it's 2a squared equals c squared, right? So, all right. That's just going to confuse yourself. Anyway, whatever. It doesn't matter. Okay, a 1 by 1 has a diagonal of 1.4. Okay, so the Gemara's of square root of 2, which the Gemara's estimating is 1.4, which is actually not pretty accurate. Much better than 3 being pi. The square root of 2 is like 1.414. Okay, so that's actually quite close as to make it 1.4. So the Gemara says the diagonal here will be 1.24 times the sides. Okay, so if that's true, so you should get to 17 minus a fifth. Meaning, what's 4 times 1.4?
5.6.
5.6. Okay, that's the diameter. So therefore, that's the diameter. So the circumference is going to be 3 times that, right? Pi times the diameter is 3 times 5.6 equals what? 16.8. Okay, that's still not 24, which is what Rabbi Yochanan said. So the Gemara says, 1 minute. So 17 minus a fifth, meaning 16.8 should be enough. So why did he say 24? We got you. Finally, we got to the idea that it has to be the square in the circle. But the square in the circle of 4 by 4 only leads to a circle of 16.8 of a circumference. Why is he saying 24? So the Gemara says, lo dak. He's not being so precise. So the Gemara says, Amor Damrin and lo dak. When you say not precise, porsa, a little bit, you round off. Tuva mi amrinan. To go from 16.8 to 24, he's not being precise. Whoever says such a huge gap and not precise, he's rounding off to the nearest 24 or something. So the Gemara says, mi amrinan lo dak. Amalei Markashisha braid Rav Chisda Rav Ashi. Misaris Gavra ba'amsa Yosef. No. Here's how we're going to get 24 people. Who told you that a person sits in an amma? Tlasa Gavri betray amsa Yosef. 3 people to 2 ammas. Okay, so that's basically that's basically a foot per person. Okay, so basically 3 people in every 2 ammot. So if that's true, 3 people in every 2 ammot. Let's figure out what we're going to get. Instead of 4 people, 4 amot by 4, right? 4 by 4. Well, maybe it's just easier to work. It's easier to work with this. 16 divided by 2 is 8. If it's 16, right? If it's 16.8 amot, how many people is that? So if it's 3 people for every 2, you divide by, you multiply it by 3.5, right? You divide by 2 and 3 people. Okay, so what is that times 1? So it's times 1.5. So what's 16.8 times 1.5? Half that is 8.4. You're going to get 25.2. Okay? Is that right? Yeah. 24, 25.2. Yes. Okay? So basically, that's what you get. 16.8 amot, according to 3 people for every 2 amot, is 25.2 people. Okay? But he said 24, so it's a lot closer. So let's take a look. So the Gemara says, okay. Kama havilahu shitzer. Anan, so how many people would you need to get 24? It does the math that way. 16. Okay, it does the math the other way, which is if you have 16 people and 3 people for every 2 amot. So how many amot does 16 people get you? Does 16? Did I say this right? No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. If you had 16 amot, how many people would you need for 16 to fit in 16 amot? If it's 3 people for every 2 amot, so it's you need 24, right? Because it's times 1.5. So you would need 24 people. So we have Rabbi Yochanan's 24 people translates
What's it?
No, 24 people, 3 people in every 2 amot. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan's, it says, Rabbi Yochanan's 24 people would mean we're dealing with a circumference of 16 amot. Whereas we've determined that we need a circumference of 16.8 amot. But we're a lot closer. 24 people with assuming 3 for every 2 leads to a 16 amma circumference. Okay, so that's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, let's take a look. Kama haviluhu shitzer. So okay. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan's 24 amot, according to 24 people, according to this, will create a circumference, a circle of 16 amot. 24 will not, rather than creating 24 will create 16. But we came to the conclusion of 16 that you needed a circle of 16.8. According to your new math, right? Your circle is only 16. So how could that be? How could that work? Low duck. All right, he's being imprecise. Okay, yeah, 24 will only get you 16. You really need a little bit more. You really need 16.8. So the Gemara says, 1 minute. Amar darmina low duck. When can we say you're being a little imprecise? L'chumra. If you're rounding up l'chumra. L'kula miyamrina low duck. We wouldn't say it l'kula, right? If you say you only need 24 people, you're going to have a sukkah. You're going to have a circumference of 16 amot. That's not big enough. You need a circumference of 16.8 amot. So we can't say, yeah, you're being imprecise. Be imprecise and tell us you need a little more, not a little less. 24 is going to lead to a sukkah that's too small. So even in your new math, that it's 3 for every 2, you're not going to get to the right answer, which is 16.8 amot. What did you want to say?
I have 2 people. I have you.
Yeah, well, that's also true. You have to do it with an average person. Yeah, you have to balance the heavy ones with the thin ones. Okay, so the Gemara says, so we're still stuck. So let's take a look. Amali Rav Asi Ravashi. Forget this new math. 1 person per amma, okay? Now, so 1 person per amma, we're back to the problem that Rabbi Yochanan said 24 people, which is 24 amot, and the circle that we need is only 16.8 amot. So again, how does Rabbi Yochanan match up? We're back to 1 person per amma. So Rabbi Yochanan mokum gavri lo kachashiv. He's not counting the place where people are sitting. What does that mean? It means Rabbi Yochanan is not assuming people are sitting on the inside. Rabbi Yochanan is assuming that people are sitting on the outside. They're sitting around your sukkah, not on the inner circumference of your circle. So if they're sitting around your sukkah, how big, right, is they're sitting here, right? People are sitting here. And they're creating they're sitting on the outside around your sukkah. How much bigger do you need that circle to be if you're now going to measure from the backs of the people? So you're going to be adding here to the diameter. How much are you adding to the diameter?
2 ammas.
What? 2 ammas. Each person is an amma by an amma. So if people are sitting around your sukkah, right, and now you're going to measure the circle from their backs, you're going to have a new diameter that's no longer, right, 5.6, but your new diameter is going to be 7.6. Is that clear? Yes, pretty much? Okay. So now that we're sitting outside and around, the new circle created measured from behind us is 7.6 diameter, which is going to be how much of a circumference?
23.
21, 18, 22.8, which is pretty close, right, to, right, the 20 to the 24. Yeah? Okay?
No, it's under, so it's better.
Well, and it's better, and we're being mach, and we're rounding off l'chumra. All right? So let's take a look. Rabbi Yochanan mokum gavri lo kachashiv. He's not counting the space that the people are sitting in, meaning they're sitting on the outside. Is basically what it means. Kama havilahu tam nisrei. So 18. Hold on. I got that. 1 minute. How's it 18? 1 minute. Wait. I think I said it. Hold on 1 minute. Hold on. I think I said this wrong. 1 minute. A minute. Hold on a minute. Al shtei amot shekashata sovel b'chutz v'yivasal mibachutz hekefo esrim v'arba ata motzei b'tocho shmona al shmona. Yeah. Koshesh pekei v'shlosha yesh brocho techfach. 1 minute. Okay. So it's 8 diameter. So the front is Mashavan in a Rachav Shisha. The Hagavra Ba'amsi Yosef. The Ashav said the front is Mipnima Lemoshavan in a Rachav Ella Shishal Shisha. Why do we have 6?
That's how we got to the 18.
What?
6 times 3.
Yeah, where do you get 6?
Hold on. This made sense last night. Hold on. Equal. Why are we getting 6? What?
3 people for 2
No, we've dropped the 3 people for 2.
because that would lower it.
Right. Rashi says if we start this with 6, right, then 6 plus 2 is 8, right? 6 plus 2 is 8. That gets you 24. So that's being imprecise, though, because that's demanding that to be 6 rather than 5.6. So, that's what the Gemara means. Okay, fine. All right, now I got it. Okay, here's what the point. If we say 24 people, okay, you have to work backwards. If we say 24 people standing on the outside, that means a diameter of 8, right? To get 24, again, the 3.1, which means, and you subtract the 1 at both ends, that means a diameter of 6 on the inner circle, okay? And if you have a diameter of 6 on the inner circle, your circumference on the inner circle is 18, okay? Right? You see that? So if you this is 24, then that's 8. That's 8, then this is 6, and then therefore their circumference is 18. So by creating an outer circle of 24, it leads to a circle that has a circumference of 18. Whereas we said you only needed a circumference of 16.8. Okay? So let's take a look. So it says, that's what the Gemara is saying. So it says, so kamahavi lahu. So how much does the 24 people, what type of a circumference does it translate into in terms of the inner circle? Tam nisrei, 18. So, and we said, you only needed 16.8. Someone says, now we're on safer territory. Now we can say he was being imprecise, but he was being machmir imprecise, not makil. You need 24 people on the outside, which leads to an inside, which is a little bit bigger than you need. You really only need an inside square of 5.6. He's going to get you an inside square of 6. He's going to be a little bit more machmir. 24 on the outside gets you 18 on the inside, gets you 6. Okay. So that's where, now we're done. Now we figured it out. Rabbanan the Kesri, Ramile Dayani the Kesri, the rabbis of Caesarea, and some say the Dayanim of Caesarea, Amri, they say, Igul denafik mi go rivua riva. Like we said before, a circle inside of the square is a quarter, meaning it's a 3-to-4 ratio. But riva denafik mi go igula, but the square that's coming out of the circle, this case, Palga is half, okay? Now, that is crazy because, as we've been seeing, it's the square inside the circle is pretty close. Okay, let's even talk about what is the general ratio, right? Here, if a circle is in the circle has a circumference of 3 and the square has a circumference of 4. What is it the other way around? What's the ratio of the square inside the circle, or whatever. Okay, you imagine that that's a square. Anyway, it's a square inside of the circle, right? What's the ratio? So here is, if this is 1 by 1, what did we say the diagonal is? Right?
1.4.
Square root of 2. Okay, let's just do it normal math. Okay, that's the diameter. Okay, so in this case, if the square of 1 by 1 is in a circle, its circumference is going to be 4. And the circle circumference is going to be, right? It's pi times
5.2.
the square root of 2, right? So pi times the square root of 2. Yes, pi times diameter, right? Which is going to be, in the Gemara math, 3 times 1.4, which is 4.2. So actually, this is a pretty shocking. It's true, if you think about it. The circle inside the square is a 3 to 4 ratio. The square inside of the circle is much closer in terms of circumference, 4 to 4.2. Okay? Because it says here, what? No. You'll figure it out. Okay? So they say, so the Dayanim say, however, Rivua denavik nigo igula palga, that the square inside of the circle is half. Okay? Now, half doesn't exactly mean half. Remember, what we're trying to do is we're trying to deal with Rabbi Yochanan's 24. But what half means here is it means a third, is basically the way Rashi explains what half means. Because it means, basically, it means if you've got, this is 24, then this inside is going to be, we know that you need a sukkah 4 by 4, right? Okay, what's the circumference of that sukkah? 16, right? 16. So when we say a half, what we really mean is that the difference of 16 and 24 is 8, which is half of 16. It's a little complicated. But anyway, basically the way we would say it is that it's a ratio of, what's the ratio of 24 to 16? Is 2 to 3.
Yeah.
Okay, they would say it's a 2 to 3 ratio. So if you have 24 on the outside, you got 16 on the inside. We know that the ratio is almost 1 to 1. Okay, not 2 to 3. So they solved it by saying that the ratio was radically different, and that gets you 16 on the inside. But the Gemara says, Velohi, that's actually not true. We see that it's not that big. We see that the ratio is much closer. Okay, but if you make a bigger ratio, if you assume, that you need that the sukkah is 3 for every 2 circumference of the square, a 16 sukkah is going to lead to a 24, circle. Okay, so that's the end of that sugya. Now, there's fascinating Tosfots here, which maybe I'll explain to you, see if I take out a minute to explain for those that are not already overwhelmed. But what I first want to do is tell you what Tosfos already realizes, and the Rabbi already realizes, is that the Dayanim are right, and they actually did explain Rabbi Yochanan and probably got the right explanation in Rabbi Yochanan, as opposed to all the complicated outside of the circle that the Gemara did, except they're not talking about circumference. They're talking about area. What is the ratio? Rabbi Yochanan said, now the Gemara said Rabbi Yochanan said 24 circumference. But maybe they understood, or maybe there's a different version or whatever, that they understood he just said 24. And maybe what he originally said was 24 area. 24 people sit in the sukkah, right? That makes a lot of sense. If you want to talk about how big it has to be, talk about how many people are sitting in the sukkah. So if he is saying that your circle sukkah has to contain, if he is saying that inside it has to contain 24 as an area, we have to figure out, right? We're going to have to figure out what is the ratio of the area of a circle to the area of the square inside of it. Yes? And because the square inside needs, if it's 4 by 4, we know that that's going to lead to an area of 16. And if a circle that goes around the square has an area of 24, right? That's the 2 to 3 ratio we just talked about. Then Rabbi Yochanan's demand of 24 makes sense. Let's take a look at what is the ratio of the area of the circle to the area of the square. So, in this type of a case, right? If this is again 1 by 1, and this is the square root of 2, okay. So let's make it an easier case. This is 2 by 2, and this is 2 times the square root of 2. Yes, people with me here? What is the radius of that circle if the diameter is 2 times the square root of 2?
1
Divide by 2.
half of that.
What the radius is? Square root of 2, right? Yes? You with me? Right? If the diameter is 2 times the square root of 2, the radius is half that. People with me? Yeah? Okay, so what is the area of the circle? Pi r squared. which would be pi times, what's r squared?
2.
So 2 pi, okay? And if pi is 3, the area would be 6. What's the area of the square? 2 by 2? 4. What's the ratio of the area squared to the area circle?
Yeah.
Right? 2 to 3. If the square has a 16 area, what will the sukkah's area be? 24. Brilliant, right? So simple. People sitting on the outside. Da, 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 da. He's talking about area. He's not talking about circumference. And a sukkah on the inside that's 4 by 4 has a 16 area. The circle around it has a 24 area. I mean, really, it has a 16 times pi area. But I'm not, excuse me, not 16 times. What do we have? Anyway, yeah. But anyway, it's no. It has a. Thank you, an 8 pi area, right? But fine, 8 pi, thank you. But 8 pi is, for the Gemara, 24. Yes, and that's true. If it's 16 on the inside area, the circle around it is 24, and that's exactly the sort of 2 to 3 ratio, right, that the Dayani de Kesari are talking about. Okay, very nice, brilliant. Why the Gemara didn't go that way is because the Gemara had clear thought that Rabbi Yochanan was totally talking about circumference and not area. But at least the Dayani de Kesari, they got it right, that is the ratio of the square and the circle if you're talking about area, not circumference. All right? I want to just tell you very quickly, because you see all these pretty pictures in Tosfos, I want to just give you a sense of what Tosfos is doing if you look at the Amud Aleph. First, I'm going to do the picture at the very bottom on the lower left corner. This is brilliant. This is Tosfos' demonstration that 1.4 is a little imprecise for the square root of 2. It would have been nice if he would have demonstrated that 3 is way imprecise for pi, but he's demonstrating that 1.4 is a little imprecise. And here's how he demonstrates it. Imagine a square 10 by 10. And now he's divided it up into, every little unit. It's got 100 on the inside, right? If you see the picture I'm talking about, you subdivide it into 4 quarters. Each square is 25, right? Fine. Let's draw a square inside of a square, okay? If the outer square is 100, how much is the inner square going to be? It's exactly half, right? It cuts everything in half, right? So what's the area of the inner square going to be? 50. Yeah, everybody with that? You see how how that cuts each of the quadrants exactly in half? So the inner square is going to have to be 50. Now, let's figure this out though. If in each of those quadrants you have a side that's 5 by 5, and 1.4 is supposed to be the hypotenuse, so what's going to be the length of the diagonal in each of the quadrants? If each of the quadrants is a 5 by 5 square, what's the length of the diagonal? 5 times the square root of 2, which is, if that's 1.4, 5 times 1.4 is, come on, it's not hard math, people. 5 times 7, thank you. So if the square is 7 by 7, what's the area of the square? 49, not 50. So it says, look, if you use 1.4, you'll get 49 when we know that the answer is 50. So you see that 1.4 is a little off. Okay, it's a very nice little demonstration that is a little imprecise for the square root of 2. Now, the other picture is even more fascinating because the other picture, in a way, is almost like a little calculus, way before the time of calculus. The other picture wants to prove the issue about how do you determine the area of a circle, okay? And here's how he does it. He says, imagine you have an infinite amount of lines, right, strings that are making up a circle. Okay, that's this inner picture, all right? Now what you're going to do is you're going to cut all the strings in half. You see that little white line? You're going to cut all the strings in half and lay them out end to end. That's going to become a triangle that at its base is the outside string, is the circumference. That's the base of the triangle, right? And at its height is the radius, because the amount that you cut. Yes? Is that sort of clear? Because that's, yeah? So therefore, now what is the area of that triangle? So you've got the diameter of the circle is the base. You've got the diameter as the base, and you've got the height of the triangle as the radius. Okay? Yes? So who remembers what the area of a triangle is? base times radius divided by 2, right? And the way Tosfos does that is he cuts half of it and he moves the other half here. So, and he makes it into a square, right? So anyway, so it's diameter times radius divided by 2. Okay, that is the area of the resultant sort of triangle, which is the area of the circle. The circle's area is the diameter times the
It's
radius.
base times height. There's no diameter and radius in it.
I understand, but it's the original
Right, it's base
diameter
times height.
radius, right, divided by 2, which means that if you, so what does this mean? And it means that this is going to lead to the question about, this leads to pi. Pi is what? Pi is diameter, pi is circumference over diameter,
Sure,
right?
because diameter radius is 3 to 2.
So the area is diameter times, because the area is the diameter times the radius. No, wait, where's the circumference? Not the diameter, that's the problem. It's the circumference, that's why. It's the circumference, right? The base here is the circumference. It was the outer part of the circle. It's circumference times the radius divided by 2, right? And therefore, circumference, how does this lead to it? I had it, 1 minute, okay. Circumference times, I think,
What's the relationship between the circumference and the radius?
no, and here's what he's saying. We know that the area, according to the Gemara, right, the area is diameter times pi, right? I mean, whatever, right? Okay, right, the area is the diameter. Okay, you know what, I'm confused. Whatever, I'm confusing everyone. Let's move on. Anyway, I don't know. Somehow I lost it. But this Tosfos figures out that the math to get that I was thinking that Tosfos was trying to figure out pi. Tosfos is trying to figure out what's the calculation for the area of a circle. Okay, that's what Tosfos wants to know, right? You know what? Forget it. Moving on. Okay, we've had enough math for today. All right, moving on. Back to the Gemara. Cheramud bet. Rabbi Levi Mishum Rabbi Meir. Shtei sukkos shel yotzrim zu lifnim mizu. If you have 2 sukkot of smelters, right? That basically, you see this sometimes in these like reconstructed villages from the Pilgrim era, where they sort of have like a working shop on the outside, and then inside they have like a smaller little sort of space where the guy lives. On the outside is where he does the smelting and where he sells the stuff. So the outside is not actually a living quarters. The living quarters is in the inner structure. Okay, so you have these 2 sukkot, zu lifnim mizu, an inner and an outer one. Hapnimis ein a sukkah. The inner one can't be used as a sukkah because that's used for your regular house. Now notice again, this is fascinating. Structurally, it could be a perfect sukkah. It's made maybe in a temporary way. It's not a permanent roof. But nevertheless, if it's your house, you can't make it your sukkah. If it's the place you generally live. And because it's your house, you have to put a mezuzah on the inner structure. The outer structure, sukkah, you can go ahead and move to your outer structure for sukkahs because that's normally not your house, that's your shop. Okay? And it's exempt from a mezuzah in general because you don't normally live there. Okay, so the Gemara says, the Gemara's only question here is about the mezuzah. Why is the outer shop area exempt from a mezuzah? Let the outer one be like a gatehouse to the inner one, right? Because if you have a structure that leads into your house, it's sort of like an antechamber to your house, then the antechamber requires a mezuzah as well. So let the outer structure be like a gatehouse to your house. Even if nobody lives there, it should be an entranceway into your house and also obligated in a mezuzah from the perspective of your house. So the Gemara says, no, mishum de lo kviya, because both of these structures, as Rashi understands it, are not so temporary. So the house is not significant enough to say that it can have a sort of like an entranceway to it. That idea that an entranceway to a house requires a mezuzah is by things in which it's natural to have an entranceway. But something that's such a temporary type of a structure, we cannot consider the outer part to be an entranceway into the house, like that's for chashav houses, and therefore the outer part does not demand a mezuzah. So the basic upshot, though, is even if something structurally is a sukkah, if it's where you live for the whole year, you can't be Yotzei Sukkos in it. You have to go to your outer room, which is not where you live. Okay, now we get to very interesting idea here about who can make the sukkah and what type of kavanah you need. Tana Rabbanan, our rabbis taught. Ganbach, if you have a sukkah ganbach, it's a mnemonic that you can remember. It's such a weird mnemonic, which means what? Sukkah's goyim, the sukkah is made by non-Jews. That's the gimel. Sukkah's nashim, or it was made by women, or sukkah's behem. I'm sorry, for non-Jews. Made by behem would be interesting, but for and made by seems to also be okay. It sort of is both, but okay. But for non-Jews, or the non-Jews probably includes made by non-Jews, or for women, or sukkah's behema, or for your animals, or sukkah's kutim, or by and for Samaritans. Sukkah mikol makam, whatever type of sukkah you make, sheira, it's kosher. As long as it's made with proper schach, as long as it's done the right parameters, we don't care who made it and for what purpose it was made. Which is amazing. You don't have to make your sukkah for the sake of sukkahs. And it doesn't have to be made for a Jew to use. It doesn't have to be made for the sake of sukkahs. As long as it's not where you live and it satisfies the right requirements, it's kosher. So the Gemara says, "My kilchasa." What do you mean the schach is done correctly? Of course, you need to do the schach correctly. So Amar Rav Chizda v'hu she'asa'al itzel. It was made for shade. We do not require. This is very important. We do not require that the schach or any of the sukkah be made for the sake of sukkahs. It could be made for some completely different purpose. Could even for animals. But in order to have the designation of schach, it has to be made for the purpose of shade. Okay, it's not called schach if it wasn't put up there to serve the purpose of shade. And this again gets to the centrality of schach as the identifier of the sukkah, and its identity of schach is something made for shade. So as long as the schach was put up for shade, I don't care what purpose the sukkah was made and who made it, it's kosher. And then the Gemara just says, okay, and sukkah mikol makom lasuye mai. What was that catch-all category you said at the end? Any type of sukkah is fine. Lasuye sukkahs rakbash. To include sukkahs rakbash. What's sukkahs rakbash? So we have another braita. Tana Rabbanan, sukkahs rakbash. So what does each letter stand for? Sukkahs roim, if it's made for by shepherds, when they're tending their sheep. Sukkahs kayatzim, or people that are watching the fruit that's out in the field that's drying, and they also move around and dwell in these huts. Sukkahs borgin, or it's made by by people that are going to watch the city watchers, and they'll move around and dwell in these sukkot. Sukkahs shomrei peirot, or people that watch the fruit. Sukkah mikol makom, any type of sukkah is ksheira. Ubuvad shedei mesucheches kilchasa, as long as the schach is right. My kilchasa, Amar Rav Chizda who shasa litzel, making it for shade. Okay, so same idea. We don't care why it's made for, what purpose it's made for. As long as it was made for shade, it's okay. Now, sukkah mikol makom lasuyemai, this list, which says any type of sukkah, what's it coming to include? Lasuye sukkahs ganbach. Sukkahs ganbach, meaning one is a list of ganbach and says any type of sukkah, even the rakbash type, and the other is a list of the rakbash and says any type of sukkah, even the ganbach type. So which list do you think is more important? So, Hai Tana de Ganbach, Alimale Ganbach, the one that starts with Ganbach, the Ganbach cases are better sukkahs. Why? Mishum Dikfi, they're relatively permanent structures. Then maybe this goes into whether sukkahs is Diras Arai or Diras Keva. So he says, even though, it was made for animals, it's okay, but you're starting with the idea that these are permanent structures. The Katana Mikol Makom, and not only that, even the Rakbash, even mikol makom, lasuye rakbash delokfi, the things that are made for the shepherds and that aren't permanent, even that's okay. So you start with ganbach, and the chiddush is even the rakbash that's not permanent. The high tana, the rakbash, the other tana starts in the opposite direction. Alimile rakbash is better. Dibnei chiyuvaninu, it's made by and maybe in for men. So it's, maybe that's more obvious. I don't care, it's temporary. That's more obvious. That's for men and Jewish men. The Tanami Kol Makom, and not only are those kosher, even the Ganbach, Lasuyin Bach de Labnei Chiyuva Ninu, that's made for people that aren't obligated. So basically, the upshot being, one list assumes one as the default, the other is the other, but everybody agrees that even if it's very temporary and made for moving around, but sukkah could be a temporary structure, and even if it's made not by and for people that aren't obligated, like non-Jews, it's totally kosher. It doesn't have to be made for the sake of sukkahs. It doesn't have to be made by somebody obligated. It just has to be made for the sake of shade. We will end there. And we actually
Good
finished.
job.
Although I wasn't